Verdant Isle did not believe in subtle beauty. It unfolded in layers, floating terraces of green suspended over crystalline lagoons, vines that shimmered faintly with bioluminescent threads at dusk, and marble walkways that curved like deliberate brushstrokes through engineered forests. Even the air felt curated, balanced precisely for optimal fragrance and oxygen density. It was the kind of world that made visitors lower their voices instinctively, as though afraid to disturb the symmetry. Guard Austin Reed did not lower his voice. He also did not admire the symmetry. He stood at the edge of the Royal Garden reception, posture straight, hands loosely clasped behind his back, eyes scanning instead of wandering. Guests drifted in careful clusters beneath suspended lanterns, shaped like miniature moons. Soft orchestral tones floated from hidden speakers embedded in living trees. Diplomats laughed too loudly at jokes they did not entirely understand. Austin watched for irregularities. Paradise, in his experience, was often the best camouflage. At the center of the main terrace, Queen Mira moved among her guests like gravity itself had chosen her as its axis. Her gown shimmered with reactive fibers that shifted hue depending on the surrounding light. Soft gold under the lanterns, pale emerald beneath the hanging vines. She looked, at first glance, completely human. Her features were refined but warm, her smile practiced to perfection. Only her ears betrayed her difference. They were long and elegant, rising delicately from her dark hair, subtly expressive. When a delegate from the northern colonies spoke too long, they angled back just slightly. When a child presented her with a cluster of luminous petals, they tilted forward with genuine softness. Austin had learned to read those ears better than most advisors. He did not mean to. It simply happened. He had been assigned to her detail 8 months ago after a minor security breach in the outer provinces. Since then, he had stood at a respectful distance during speeches, negotiations, and ceremonies. He had memorized her walking pace. He knew how she adjusted her shoulders before stepping onto a platform. He knew that she inhaled deeply just before delivering difficult decisions. He also knew that she had not once, in 8 months, stopped moving. The reception was designed to be effortless. Verdant Isle specialized in engineered serenity. Micro-drones adjusted temperature gradients to keep guests comfortable, and invisible gravitic stabilizers ensured no one stumbled on uneven ground. In theory. Austin noticed the petal before anyone else did. It was small, iridescent, and had fallen from one of the overhead vines onto the marble steps leading to the fountain dais, a single harmless-looking fragment of decoration. Queen Mira approached the steps to deliver her speech. Her advisors formed a loose semicircle behind her. Cameras hovered discreetly above the gathering, capturing every angle. Austin shifted slightly closer, instinct prickling. She placed her foot on the first step, the pedal compressed under her heel. For a fraction of a second, the gravitic stabilizers lagged. Not enough to trigger an alert, enough to shift balance. Her body tilted forward. There was no dramatic cry, no flailing arms, just a sharp intake of breath and the sudden, unmistakable loss of equilibrium. Austin moved before protocol could. He closed the distance in 2 strides, one arm wrapping around her waist just as her knee bent toward the marble. His other hand braced against the fountain's edge, absorbing momentum. The world narrowed to contact and weight. She fell into him, not partially, fully. The impact was softer than expected. Her head brushed his shoulder, her hand instinctively gripping the fabric at his collar. For a heartbeat, her body tensed as though preparing to spring away. The music faltered. The garden quieted. Austin held her steady, every muscle controlled. "Your Majesty," he murmured, low enough to avoid amplification. She did not move. Protocol dictated immediate recovery. A queen did not remain in a guard's arms longer than necessary. Appearances were architecture. Any crack risked collapse. Her fingers tightened slightly instead. "Don't," she whispered. It was not the voice she used in councils. It was softer, thinner. Austin blinked once, surprised by the intimacy of the request. "Don't what, Your Majesty?" he asked carefully. "Don't move." Her long ears brushed lightly against his collarbone. Up close, he could see the faint tremor in them, not from pain, but from something heavier. Behind them, advisors exchanged alarmed glances. One began to step forward. Austin subtly adjusted his stance. widening his footing to appear as though he was merely stabilizing her before she rose. She did not rise. Her breathing was slow, measured, but not steady. "I am supposed to stand," she murmured, barely audible. "Yes, Your Majesty," he replied. "I am always standing." The words were not dramatic. They were simple, and they carried the weight of years. Austin became acutely aware of the warmth of her cheek against his chest, the faint scent of the bioluminescent blossoms woven into her hair, the way her shoulders seemed to lower by a fraction now that she was not holding herself upright. He did not shift. The silence in the garden stretched thin. One of the gravitic stabilizers corrected itself with a faint hum, as though embarrassed. "Are you injured?" he asked quietly. "No." A pause. "Just tired." He allowed himself the smallest breath of humor. "The marble does not look comfortable." A faint huff of something like laughter escaped her. "It rarely is." Her hand loosened slightly, but she still did not step away. Austin realized with sudden clarity that she had not fallen because of a pedal. She had fallen because she had not noticed it, and she had not noticed it because she was somewhere else entirely. "If I stand now," she whispered, "they will applaud my composure." He glanced briefly at the frozen semicircle of guests pretending not to stare. "They probably will. And I will smile. That is generally how applause works." Another almost laugh, fragile and brief. "And I am so very tired of smiling," she said. Austin did not know the correct response, so he did not give one. He simply held her weight, light but unmistakably real, and waited. The music resumed, hesitant at first, then smoother. Advisors repositioned themselves to shield the moment from the worst angles. Cameras adjusted framing to imply a graceful recovery in progress. Still she remained, her head resting against his shoulder, her long ears angled slightly downward, not in defeat, but in relief. And for the first time since he had been assigned to her, Queen Mira was not standing. She was leaning, and she did not want to get up. The garden recovered before the moment did. Music resumed with a carefully modulated swell, as if the orchestra had decided that what the evening needed was confidence. Lanterns shifted hue, brightening subtly to redirect attention toward the outer terraces, where a cluster of diplomats began applauding something no one had fully witnessed. Verdun Isle's environmental AI worked quietly to smooth over irregularities. It adjusted breeze patterns, diffused the scent of flowering vines, and recalibrated camera angles to create the illusion of uninterrupted elegance. At the center of it all, Queen Mira remained in Austin's arms. Her grip on his collar had softened, but it had not vanished. Her head still rested against his shoulder, and he could feel the slow rhythm of her breathing through the layers of fabric. It was not the breath of someone injured. It was the breath of someone who had been holding herself too tightly for too long. An advisor approached cautiously, stopping just within polite distance. "Your Majesty?" he said, voice controlled and low. Mira did not lift her head. "I am aware," she replied evenly, though her words vibrated faintly against Austin's chest. There was a subtle shift in the advisor's stance. He was calculating optics, angles, interpretations. Austin calculated something simpler: balance. He adjusted his footing slightly, redistributing her weight so that the embrace appeared transitional rather than intentional. It was a small deception, but effective. To distant observers, it looked like a recovery paused mid-motion. Up close, it was something else entirely. "Your Majesty," Austin murmured quietly, "if you remain here much longer, I will have to request hazard compensation." Her shoulders moved almost imperceptibly. "For what hazard?" she asked. "For defying gravity in a public setting." A faint, reluctant laugh escaped her. It was softer than the music, quieter than the fountain's gentle cascade, but it existed. "Gravity failed me," she said. "I noticed. Verdun Isle prides itself on stable footing." "It does," he agreed. "It will be very disappointed." Another breath, this one deeper. Behind them, the advisor took a half-step closer. "Perhaps," he ventured delicately, "we should proceed to the speech." Mira's hand tightened again, just briefly. "Not yet," she said more clearly now. The advisor froze. Austin felt the tension ripple outward from that simple refusal. A queen delaying her own speech was not catastrophic. It was, however, unusual. Schedules were architecture. Architecture did not appreciate improvisation. Mira lifted her head slightly, enough that her cheek no longer pressed fully against him, but not enough to create distance. Her long ears brushed against his collar, angled outward in thoughtful concentration. "Tell me something," she whispered. Austin blinked once. "About security?" "About anything." He hesitated. Verdant Isle's gravitic stabilizers compensate for 99.7% of surface irregularities, he said quietly. The remaining 0.3% is statistically insignificant. And yet, she murmured, "Here we are." "Yes, Your Majesty." Her eyes flicked upward toward his face. They were closer now than they had ever been. Not across a corridor, not across a ceremonial hall. Close enough that he could see the fine tension at the corners. "I calculate constantly," she said softly. "Every word, every expression, every gesture." Her ears shifted slightly backward, then forward again, betraying more emotion than her face allowed. "And in this moment?" he asked. "In this moment," she replied, "I would prefer not to calculate." He considered that carefully. "Then don't," he said. The simplicity of the suggestion startled her. He felt it in the way her posture shifted slightly. "It is not that easy," she said. "It is rarely that complicated." A small silence formed between them, private, insulated from the curated harmony of the garden. She exhaled slowly. "If I stand now," she said, "I will resume being the axis." "You are the axis," he replied, "and I am tired of holding the rotation." He almost smiled at that. "Planets rotate whether you hold them or not," he said. "They're very stubborn." A faint curve touched her lips. "You are not particularly reverent." "I try to be practical." Her hand slid from his collar to rest more naturally against his shoulder. It was a subtle shift, but it felt deliberate. Less desperation, more choice. The advisor cleared his throat again. "Your Majesty," he began cautiously, "guests are awaiting—" Mira raised one hand without turning her head. He fell silent instantly. Austin realized something then. She was not incapable of rising. She was choosing not to. Not because she was weak, but because she had found, unexpectedly, a moment without performance. Her breathing steadied further. "You are not uncomfortable?" she asked. "I am a guard," he said. "Standing still is one of my core competencies." "And holding a queen?" "That was not covered in training," he admitted. "I am improvising." Her ears angled forward slightly. "You are calm. I am focused." "On what?" "On not dropping you." That earned a fuller laugh this time, though still restrained. "I appreciate that," she said. The music swelled again, signaling that the reception could not remain suspended indefinitely. Mira drew a slow breath and lifted her head fully at last. But she did not immediately step away. Instead, she remained close enough that only those nearest would notice the difference. "When I rise," she said quietly, "walk with me." "As security?" he asked. "As anchor," she replied. He did not fully understand the word in that context, but he nodded once. "Very well." She straightened slowly, reclaiming her height, her posture, her carefully balanced composure. The shift was visible, like watching gravity reassert itself. Her long ears rose elegantly once more, controlled and poised. The queen had returned, yet something had changed. She did not step away immediately. For a fraction of a second longer than protocol allowed, she allowed her hand to remain lightly against his shoulder. Then she turned toward the waiting guests, smile composed, voice steady. "Apologies for the interruption," she said gracefully. "Verdant Isle reminds us that even perfection can slip." Polite laughter rippled outward. The illusion was restored. But as she began ascending the marble steps once more, she did not climb alone. Austin walked half a step behind her, close enough that, if she miscalculated again, he would catch her, and close enough that she did not feel as though she was standing entirely by herself. The speech was flawless. It always was. Queen Mira stood at the fountain dais beneath suspended lanterns and drifting petals, her voice steady and luminous as the waters behind her. She spoke of unity between Verdant Isle and the outer colonies, of sustainable expansion, of shared futures, shaped not by fear, but by collaboration. The words were elegant, carefully structured, precisely weighted. Austin stood to her right, half a step behind. From a distance, he looked like what he was meant to be. Silent security, neutral presence, decorative reassurance. Up close, he noticed the details others missed. The micro-pause before a particularly diplomatic phrase. The way her long ears angled back slightly when an ambassador coughed at the wrong moment. The almost imperceptible tightening of her shoulders when applause rose too sharply. She did not stumble again, but she did not stand quite the same way either. When the speech concluded, applause filled the garden. The gravitic stabilizers hummed in approval. Lanterns brightened fractionally, responding to the celebratory audio profile. The environmental AI interpreted the event as a success. Austin interpreted something else. As she descended the marble steps, she slowed just enough that he could draw level with her, without violating formation. "You survived the speech," he murmured quietly. "I always do," she replied. "High praise for your own resilience. I prefer measured confidence." They moved along the curved pathway toward the inner garden corridor, where bioluminescent vines arched overhead like quiet constellations. The advisors followed at a respectful distance. When they reached the corridor threshold, Mira paused. "Remain," she said softly without looking at him. The advisors hesitated. "Your Majesty?" one ventured. "I require a moment of air," she replied smoothly. "Guard Reed will accompany me." There was no visible objection, none that dared to surface. The advisors retreated to the terrace edge, whispering softly to one another, likely recalibrating contingency plans for unscheduled solitude. Mira stepped into the inner garden. The corridor curved away from the reception, lined with translucent leaves that emitted a faint blue glow. Verdant Isles flora had been engineered to respond to emotional frequencies. The light subtly shifted in tone depending on the biosignatures of those nearby. As they walked deeper, the glow softened from bright azure to muted indigo. Austin noticed. "So the plants judge us now," he said quietly. "They respond to stress indicators," she corrected. "So, yes." A faint smile curved her lips. The corridor opened into a smaller clearing overlooking one of the floating lagoons. Water drifted below, held in place by gentle gravitational manipulation, reflecting both suns in fractured gold. She stopped at the edge. For a moment she did not speak. Her long ears angled outward, no longer controlled by public restraint. The shift was subtle but undeniable. "You did not withdraw," she said at last. "You asked me not to," he replied. "That is insufficient justification for scandal. I prefer to think of it as delayed protocol." She glanced sideways at him. "You are remarkably calm for someone who has likely altered the trajectory of palace gossip." "I assume palace gossip was already in motion." She exhaled slowly. "Do you know," she said, "how many advisors attempted to calculate the symbolic implications of my fall? I can imagine. They have likely concluded it was a strategic display of humility." "That sounds efficient." "It was not," she said quietly. Silence settled between them, broken only by the faint hum of gravitic fields holding the lagoon in suspension. "I was not thinking about strategy," she continued. "No? I was thinking about nothing." He turned slightly toward her. "That sounds peaceful." "It was frightening." "Why?" She hesitated as if the admission required clearance. "Because I did not know what would happen if I stopped calculating." He considered that. "And what happened?" She looked at him fully now. "You caught me." The simplicity of it unsettled him more than any threat assessment ever had. He cleared his throat lightly. "That was my assignment." "No," she said gently. "That was instinct." The bioluminescent vines overhead dimmed another shade, responding to the steadier rhythm of her pulse. She stepped closer to the lagoon's edge, careful this time. "I have ruled for 6 years," she said. "In that time, I have negotiated trade with 3 systems, prevented 2 border conflicts, and attended 912 formal functions." "An impressive survival rate," he said. She almost laughed. "And yet," she continued, "I cannot remember the last time someone held me without expecting something in return." He shifted his weight slightly, unsure how to respond. "You are a queen," he said carefully. "Yes, that comes with expectations." Her ears angled back briefly. "That is precisely the problem." A small maintenance drone drifted overhead, scanning leaf integrity. It paused momentarily, perhaps confused by the lowered light output, then continued on its path. Mira watched it. Verdant Isle was designed as a sanctuary, she said, a world without visible conflict. Even the storms are moderated. And yet you slipped, he said. Yes. Maybe perfection is too smooth. She looked at him, genuinely considering that. You speak as though imperfection is preferable. I think it's more honest. She leaned lightly against the marble railing, gaze drifting over the floating water below. If I had stood immediately, she said, no one would remember. And now? They will speculate. He shrugged faintly. Speculation keeps people occupied. Her smile returned, softer this time. You are not troubled by proximity to scandal. I am troubled by unstable footing, he replied. Scandal is secondary. She laughed again, more freely now. The sound echoed softly across the lagoon. You are aware, she said, that remaining in my arms for that long will be analyzed. I assume they are already drafting interpretive reports? She turned toward him fully. Does that concern you? He considered it honestly. I am more concerned about whether you will fall again. Her ears lifted slightly. And if I do, I will catch you. There was no bravado in the statement, no flourish, just fact. She studied him in silence as though weighing the simplicity of it. Then perhaps, she said softly, I will not try so hard to remain upright. The vines overhead brightened slightly in response to her steadier pulse. From the terrace beyond, faint laughter drifted back toward them. The reception continued. Diplomats exchanged polite agreements. Cameras recorded curated moments of grace. In the quiet clearing, the queen who ruled a paradise world stood without calculating her posture, and the guard who was trained to anticipate danger found himself guarding something far more delicate than protocol. For the first time since the fall, she did not look tired. She looked still, and she did not rush to move. The reception eventually reclaimed her. It always did. An aide approached the inner garden with the cautious steps of someone who understood the difference between interruption and necessity. Mira saw him before he spoke. Her long ears angled slightly toward the sound of his shoes brushing against the luminous moss. They are ready for the envoy from Torellis, the aide said carefully. They request your presence at the eastern terrace. Of course they did. Mira's shoulders lifted, then settled. The softness that had briefly replaced calculation began to fold back into place like ceremonial fabric being redraped. Inform them I will arrive shortly, she said. The aide bowed and retreated, relief evident in the precision of his posture. Silence returned to the inner garden. Austin remained half a step behind her, exactly as he had been trained. Yet the air between them had changed. It was no longer strictly professional. It held memory. You see, she said quietly, rotation resumes. Planets are persistent, he replied. She glanced at him sideways. You have a limited but committed astronomical vocabulary. It's effective. She turned back toward the lagoon. The floating water shifted gently as a gravitic adjustment smoothed a minor current. Verdant Isle did not tolerate visible turbulence. I could request that the envoy wait, she said. You could. I will not. No. Her ears tilted forward slightly. You answer as though you already know my decisions. I observe patterns, he said. And what pattern do you see now? He hesitated just long enough to be honest. You want to delay, but you won't. A faint breath escaped her. Not frustration, recognition. You are not intimidated by proximity, she said. By you, he asked lightly. Yes. I am intimidated by miscalculating distance from floating lagoons, he said. You are secondary. Her laugh came quicker this time. You are impossible to rattle. That's the training. She turned to face him fully. What would you do, she asked, if I refused to return? He blinked once. Refused how? Simply remained here. Until when? She considered that. Until I remembered who I am without applause. He studied her carefully. You would be found, he said gently. Yes. They would interpret it. Yes. And you would have to explain. Her ears angled back slightly at that word. Explain. Yes. She looked away again, toward the suspended water below. Every deviation requires explanation, she murmured, even falling. A small drone drifted into the clearing, its spherical body emitting a soft green scan line across the plants. It paused when it detected elevated emotional markers, hovering uncertainly before transmitting a discrete update to the Palace AI. Mira glanced up at it. Even the Florophiles reports, she said. Verdant Isle is thorough. She watched the drone for a moment longer. What would happen, she asked quietly, if I chose not to explain? He exhaled slowly. You would create uncertainty. And that is dangerous? Only if people fear it. She looked at him sharply. Do you fear uncertainty? I prepare for it. That is not the same. No. She stepped closer to the railing again, this time placing both hands on the cool marble. Her posture was no longer the rigid symmetry of a ruler. It was balanced, grounded. I am tired of being the still point, she said. Then move, he replied. She turned her head slightly. You make it sound simple. It often is. It is not. No, he admitted, but it can be. A faint breeze moved through the corridor, triggered by environmental adjustments elsewhere in the garden. The vines overhead brightened briefly, then dimmed. She closed her eyes for a moment. I did not fall because of the petal, she said. I know. I fell because I was thinking about tomorrow's trade decision, and the day after, and the month after that. Yes, her eyes opened. And in that 1 second, she continued, I was not queen. I was simply unbalanced. And someone caught you. She looked at him again, studying his face as though searching for calculation. Why did you not step away? She asked. I considered it. You did? Yes. And? I decided that catching you was more important than appearing correct. The honesty of the statement settled between them without ornament. Her ears shifted, forward, then slightly outward, processing. You realize, she said slowly, that your decision made you part of the narrative. I am aware. Guards are not meant to be narrative. I am reconsidering that guideline. She smiled faintly. Are you afraid of consequence? I am afraid of dropping you, he replied again. She shook her head lightly. You reduce everything to gravity. It's reliable. A distant chime signaled the envoy's growing impatience. She straightened slowly. For a moment, Austin thought the softness would vanish entirely. It didn't. It condensed. She did not retreat from him this time. Instead, she stepped closer, close enough that only a whisper could carry between them. If I stumble again, she said softly, it may not be an accident. He held her gaze steadily. Then I will be ready. Her lips curved, not into the full diplomatic smile, but into something quieter. She turned and began walking back toward the terrace. This time, she did not place distance between them immediately. He walked beside her, not behind. Advisors noticed. They would calculate. They would interpret. Verdant Isle's AI would adjust lighting and temperature to maintain the illusion of perfection. But as they re-entered the reception, Mira did not resume her former posture completely. Her shoulders were lower by a fraction. Her ears moved more freely. And when the envoy bowed deeply and began a lengthy address, she allowed herself just once to glance at Austin with open amusement. He raised an eyebrow slightly. She did not smile for the cameras. She smiled because she wanted to. The rotation of duty resumed, but the axis had shifted. The reception concluded with flawless timing. Envoys departed satisfied. Trade accords were sealed with polished declarations. The last lantern dimmed gradually as Verdant Isle's evening cycle began to lower ambient light. Artificial constellations shimmered faintly above the upper terraces, designed to mimic ancient skies long lost to orbital expansion. Queen Mira returned to the palace through a corridor of translucent crystal walls that refracted moonlight into shifting patterns across the floor. Austin walked 2 steps behind her now, formal distance restored. The brief deviation in proximity during the reception had been filed away under incident successfully managed. Except it had not been managed. It had been felt. The palace interior was quiet in a way that gardens never were. Verdant Isle's central complex was designed for acoustic neutrality. Footsteps barely echoed, and the air filtration systems hummed in frequencies too low for most species to consciously perceive. At the entrance to her private wing, Mira stopped. The attending aides paused at a respectful distance. "Leave us," she said calmly. There was no hesitation. The aides withdrew. The corridor emptied. Only the two of them remained beneath the soft, shifting glow of embedded wall panels. Austin straightened slightly. "Your Majesty?" She did not move immediately. The palace AI registered the absence of secondary personnel and dimmed the lighting by 2 degrees to indicate privacy protocol. Her long ears angled backward briefly. Fatigue, not alarm. "You stood beside me," she said. "Yes. You did not correct your position. I was not instructed to. That has never stopped others." He considered that. Perhaps they are more obedient. She turned slowly. Her expression was composed, but the calculation had thinned. "Obedience is comforting," she said. "It requires no interpretation." "And what does standing beside you require?" he asked quietly. "Risk." The words settled in the corridor like a suspended particle. She stepped closer, no audience now to soften the gesture. "You altered perception tonight," she continued. "Not only of me, of you. I am a guard. You were." He did not respond to that. She studied him carefully. "After I fell," she said, "you did not treat it as weakness. No, you treated it as human." "You are," he replied simply. Her ears shifted forward sharply at that. "I am queen," she corrected gently. "You are both." Silence lingered. A maintenance drone drifted quietly past the end of the corridor, pausing briefly to recalibrate a light panel before continuing. The palace never truly slept. "I have been told," she said softly, "that distance preserves authority." "Does it?" "It preserves illusion." He almost smiled. "I prefer stable footing to illusion. You and your gravity. It's consistent." Her lips curved faintly. "Are you aware," she asked, "that several members of my council are drafting theoretical implications of my fall? I assume they are very busy. They are attempting to determine whether it was staged." He blinked once. "Was it?" Her ears angled outward, amused. "No." "Then their calculations are inefficient." She stepped even closer now, the distance between them minimal but deliberate. "If I were to stage such a moment," she said quietly, "would you agree to catch me again?" He met her gaze steadily. "Yes." "Without question?" "Yes." "Even if it compromised your standing?" "I am already standing," he replied. She exhaled slowly. "There is a difference between standing and belonging," she said. He understood the nuance. "You belong to this world," he said. "I belong to its expectation." "And what do you belong to when you stop performing?" She hesitated. "I do not know." "Perhaps that's the point." A faint tremor passed through the palace floor as the orbital stabilizers adjusted Verdant Isle's position relative to its twin moons. It was subtle, barely perceptible, but Austin felt it instinctively. Mira did too. She closed her eyes briefly. "You felt that," she said. "Yes." "You are always aware of shifts." "Yes." "I envy that." "Why?" "Because you prepare for them." She opened her eyes again. "I have spent years preventing shifts," she continued, "holding everything in place. And I am tired." The admission was not dramatic. It was honest. He did not step forward. He did not step back. "I can stand," she said quietly. "I know. But I do not always want to." He nodded once. "You don't have to." Her ears stilled. "That is not how monarchy functions." "No," he agreed, "but that is how balance does." She studied him again, searching for mockery. There was none. "You are dangerously simple," she said. "I prefer direct." "Directness unsettles people. Only if they're unstable." She laughed softly at that. The sound echoed gently off the crystal walls. "You are aware," she said, "that tonight I chose not to rise immediately." "Yes, that was deliberate." "I know. And you supported that choice." "Yes." Her gaze softened. "You became complicit." "If you say so." She stepped even closer now, until the space between them was narrow enough that only intention prevented contact. "If I stumble again," she said, "it may not be from distraction." He held her gaze. "Then I will not assume it is." A faint warmth colored her expression. "You understand the implication," she said. "I understand gravity." She shook her head lightly. "You are impossible. Frequently." The palace lighting dimmed slightly further as night cycle advanced. From somewhere deeper within the complex, the distant murmur of advisors debating symbolic narratives drifted faintly. Mira glanced toward the sound, then back at him. "They will ask me about tonight," she said. "What will you tell them?" "That I slipped." "And?" "And that I was caught." She paused. "And that I did not mind." Her ears angled forward decisively. "For once," she added softly, "I did not want to get up." The words lingered between them. Not scandalous, not dramatic, just true. Austin inclined his head slightly. "Then next time," he said quietly, "we'll take our time." And for the first time since the reception began, Queen Mira did not correct his proximity. She simply stood there, balanced, not because she had to, but because she chose to. The following morning, Verdun Isle woke as though nothing had happened. Sunlight filtered through the layered atmosphere in carefully calibrated hues. Floating terraces rotated slightly to maximize light exposure for the engineered flora. Palace drones conducted routine diagnostics. The reception's recordings had already been edited into pristine highlights for interstellar broadcast. Only one detail had been quietly archived rather than celebrated: the fall. Austin stood at his assigned post outside the Queen's private council chamber. His posture was immaculate, expression neutral, attention alert. Inside, advisors debated trade percentages and supply chain expansions. Their voices rose and fell in polite intensity. He listened for threat indicators. He did not listen for her breathing. When the council session ended, the advisors exited first. They bowed respectfully, though their glances lingered on him with a new calculation. He remained still. Mira stepped out last. Her attire was formal but less rigid than usual, structured robes softened by lighter fabric at the sleeves. Her long ears angled slightly outward, betraying the fatigue that formal posture masked. "Walk with me," she said calmly. There was no hesitation in his compliance. They moved through the corridor toward the Eastern Observatory, where transparent panels opened onto the floating lagoons below. The palace AI adjusted the hallway lighting to a softer gradient, anticipating private discussion. "You have become a subject of interest," she said. "I suspected. 3 members of the council believe your reaction time was rehearsed. It was not. 2 others suspect coordinated optics." He almost smiled. "I am flattered by the implied foresight." She glanced at him sideways. "You are not troubled." "I am troubled by poor footing," he replied. She shook her head lightly. "You reduce everything to balance. It's efficient." They reached the observatory. The entire lagoon stretched below them, suspended water shimmering with faint gravitational stabilization fields. Tiny maintenance drones skimmed the surface, adjusting surface tension to maintain aesthetic symmetry. Mira rested her hands against the transparent panel. "Do you know how many micro-adjustments this world requires per hour?" she asked. "No. 40,000. He raised an eyebrow. "Impressive." "It is exhausting." He understood the metaphor immediately. "You are not a gravitic stabilizer," he said quietly. "No," she replied, "but I have been pretending to be one." A faint tremor passed through the palace structure as orbital alignment shifted slightly. The lagoon's stabilization field shimmered brighter for a second, compensating. She felt it. He saw her shoulders tense. "You anticipate shifts," she said softly. "Yes." "And you do not resent them." "No." "Why?" "Because resisting them wastes energy." She exhaled slowly. "I have been resisting for years. And now? I am considering adjusting." A small service drone drifted into the observatory, paused when it detected their proximity, then rerouted discreetly. Mira watched it go. "Yesterday," she said, "I allowed myself to remain in your arms." "Yes." "That was not strategy." "No." "It was relief." He did not comment. She turned to face him fully. "Do you regret it?" she asked. "No." "Even knowing it complicates perception?" "I am accustomed to complications." Her ears tilted forward slightly. "You are aware," she said, "that proximity alters hierarchy." "I am aware." "And you are comfortable with that?" I am comfortable catching you. She studied him, searching for arrogance. There was none. Do you know, she said quietly, how many people have tried to steady me? Many. And how many did so without agenda? He hesitated. Fewer. She nodded. That is why I did not rise. Silence settled between them. Not heavy, just present. You could request reassignment, she said. I could. Many would advise it. I am not many, she almost laughed. You are remarkably inconvenient. So I've been told. She stepped closer, closing the formal distance once more. If I fall again, she said softly, it may not be from imbalance. He met her gaze. Then I will not assume it is. The simplicity of the exchange steadied her more than any diplomatic victory had. From the far end of the observatory, a junior advisor entered hesitantly. Your Majesty, the outer province representatives have arrived. She did not break eye contact immediately. Inform them I will join them shortly. The advisor bowed and retreated. Mira inhaled slowly. There is always someone waiting, she said. Yes. And you will always be there? As long as I am assigned. She considered that carefully. And if you were not, he paused, I would still catch you. The statement lingered between them, stripped of protocol, her ears stilled completely, a rare occurrence. You understand, she said, that is no longer purely professional. Yes, and you are not afraid. I am aware. A faint smile touched her lips. Then perhaps, she said softly, neither of us needs to stand quite so rigidly. The lagoon shimmered below, stabilized but never static. Outside the palace walls, Verdant Isle rotated in perfect measured arcs. Inside the observatory, the queen who once refused to falter allowed herself to consider imbalance not as failure, but as possibility. And the guard who once existed solely at the perimeter found himself standing not behind her, but beside her. Verdant Isle did not allow storms, not naturally. Weather systems were moderated, wind currents adjusted by orbital mirrors and atmospheric regulators. Rain fell only when scheduled. Breezes were programmed to enhance comfort. Even lightning on the rare ceremonial occasions it was permitted followed mapped trajectories that posed no risk. So when the first unscheduled tremor rippled through the eastern gardens 3 nights later, the palace AI hesitated. It was small, barely perceptible. Austin felt it immediately. He was stationed near the central promenade as Queen Mira concluded an evening walk with provincial delegates. Lanterns floated above the pathway, casting gentle amber light over engineered blossoms that never wilted prematurely. The tremor deepened. Not catastrophic, but real. The gravitic stabilizers hummed louder than usual. Guests paused, exchanging uncertain glances. A few laughed awkwardly, assuming novelty. Verdant Isle did not shake. Mira stopped mid-sentence. Her long ears angled sharply outward, alert. The ground shifted again, just enough to send a ripple through the floating lagoon nearby. Water shimmered violently as stabilization fields recalibrated. A cluster of diplomats stumbled slightly. A cluster of diplomats stumbled slightly. The walkway dipped by a fraction of a degree. Mira lost her footing. It was subtle this time. Not dramatic, just enough. She tilted sideways. Austin was already moving. He caught her again. This time there was no gasp from the crowd. No frozen silence. There was recognition. She landed against him, steadying herself with one hand at his chest. The tremor passed. The gravitic fields brightened briefly, compensating. Around them, aides rushed to reassure guests. Drones scanned for structural damage. The palace AI continued narrating stability metrics. Mira did not step away immediately, but she did not collapse into him either. She stood balanced within his hold, her breathing even. Orbital variance, she murmured softly. Impressive timing, he replied. A faint smile touched her lips. You think I staged a planetary tremor? I would not put it past you. She laughed lightly, even as advisors approached. Your Majesty, are you injured? One asked urgently. No, she replied clearly. I am steady. She did not remove Austin's arm immediately. Instead, she turned slightly toward the gathering delegates. Verdant Isle adjusts, she said calmly, as do we. The words were simple, but they were not rehearsed. The advisors quieted. The tremor had not been catastrophic. It had not caused damage. It had, however, broken the illusion of absolute control. Mira felt it in the air, the subtle recalibration of perception. She stepped away from Austin then, not abruptly, not defensively, deliberately. "I will continue the walk," she said. A murmur of approval rippled through the guests. Austin resumed position beside her, not behind. They walked forward as the gravitic stabilizers returned to optimal output. "You did not cling," he said quietly. "No. You did not rush to stand." "I was already standing." He glanced at her. She met his gaze steadily. "I do not fear falling anymore," she said. "That's efficient." She shook her head lightly. "You are incorrigible." They reached the lagoon's edge. The water had settled, though faint oscillations remained visible beneath the surface. Mira paused. "For years," she said softly, "I believed that if I allowed even a moment of visible imbalance, everything would fracture." And it did not. Austin studied the stabilized water below. "It rarely does." She inhaled slowly, feeling the subtle vibration of orbital correction beneath her feet. "I have spent so long pretending to be the stabilizer," she continued, "that I forgot I was allowed to move. And now? Now I will move." A junior advisor approached cautiously. "Your Majesty, orbital systems report full compensation. The variance has been corrected." Mira nodded. "Good." The advisor hesitated. "There are questions regarding public perception." "Let them question," she said gently. The advisor blinked, startled by the simplicity of the response. "As you wish." He retreated. Mira turned back toward Austin. "You see," she said, "gravity again." She almost laughed. "You have reduced my existential growth to physics. It keeps things manageable." She stepped closer, not enough to cause scandal, but enough to close unnecessary distance. "When I fell the first time," she said quietly, "I did not want to get up because I was tired. Yes. When I fell tonight, I did not mind standing again." He nodded once. "Progress." She studied him carefully. "You have changed as well," she said. "I have?" "You no longer stand only at the perimeter." He considered that. "Perhaps I misjudged the center." Her ears angled forward with quiet warmth. "Verdant Isle will experience further variances," she said. "Orbital systems are not infallible." "No system is." "Then we will adjust." "Yes." They stood there a moment longer, watching the lagoon settle completely. Above them, the twin moons aligned cleanly once more. The Palace AI dimmed its alert indicators. Life resumed its curated rhythm, but something fundamental had shifted. Mira no longer held herself as the axis of perfect stillness. She allowed micro-movements, small shifts in posture, slight deviations from rehearsed symmetry. She did not rush to correct every imbalance. She walked with Austin beside her, not as shield alone, but as counterweight. "You realize," she said softly, "that the Council will analyze tonight. I assume they are already drafting reports. And what will they conclude? That you are human." She smiled at that. "I am not. You are enough." The lanterns brightened as the walk concluded. Guests resumed conversation. The tremor became anecdote. But as Mira stepped forward into the light, she did so without forcing her shoulders rigid. If she stumbled again, it would not be because she was unaware. And if she leaned, it would not be out of exhaustion. It would be by choice. Austin watched the garden recalibrate around her. Verdant Isle did not eliminate instability. It managed it. And now so did she. When the next breeze passed through the floating